let's start with the Socceroos. It is a very important window, one that the squad selection has dominated the headlines, of course, with a number of fresh names. We always knew this was going to be experimental. Matt, I don't think anyone expected it to be quite so experimental, especially in the fashion that it was. Obviously, my brain watching Popovic select his squads, for me, this is the window where you're picking lots of A-League players. And there are a few of them here, but a lot of the surprises actually aren't coming from the A-League themselves. You think of the likes of Denny Juric, who has unfortunately had to withdraw out of the squad due to injury, but even James Overy as well, the 17, now 18-year-old, happy birthday, out of Manchester United. Of course, you'll know him well. Can you speak a little bit about his journey, and then in the context of the Socceroos window
within the Western Australian and Australian kind of football stratosphere, I think he was one that actually wasn't around all that much, because he left to go to England really, really young, like 15, 16. And there was a note at the time that, Glory have sent this guy out to Manchester United and it's a great opportunity. But when they're that young, there's just not a lot of data that you can really take on these guys, right? Especially when, again, the competition that they're playing is within the WA system, which at the youth ranks, it's just very, very hard to get a judge of how seriously good someone like that can be. And to be honest, when you see a teenager out of WA going to a big club in Europe, your first instinct is to think of kind of Jacob Italianos and Danny De Silvas and all of these guys that did have that promise shown. And ultimately, I think the best move an Australian player can make at that age is one where they go into an environment where they can constantly be tested and experience a higher level of play. So that was James' journey for a long time, and then his name didn't really pop up again for a couple of years until it was like, he's in the U20 squad for this most recent World Cup, right? So really quite an unknown. But again, I go back to kind of the Jalen Pittman and Daniel Benny experience that I've seen a lot of recently. That Premier League 2 level, the kind of age group teams at Premier League level, such a fantastic place to be playing your football at that age. So no doubt James has stepped up at that level, and no doubt he's someone that can fit into the mould. But I think his call-up is mostly just about a weird cornerstone of the culture that Popovic has installed, that's been about really getting guys involved just for the experience. And this is what this window is all about, right? It's not the last window before the World Cup, so it's not about all the final preparations. It's just about being able to actually assess every option you've got available to you, and that's where the extra depth and the options there are good. But I come back to the fact that Ryan Teague, after having this conversation around going to Shanghai and China and all this kind of stuff, he's then come in for a Socceroos camp and done a bit of training and this and that, and has come to be a guy that's obviously had a few starting appearances since. So it's just about being able to mould those players in, and I see nothing wrong with it with James. I think he's got a bright future, but just the level that he's been playing at, both when he was in WA and now with Man United, he's been a mostly mysterious player throughout. So it's a funny one, really.
Yeah. You touch on an interesting meta point there, because I think one of the things that people have most struggled with in the last few windows in terms of squad selection is that Popovic has made a very big deal about, you have to earn the shirt and I'm not going to sell you the shirt, and you have to play well and consistently. That was a big argument for the likes of why Adrian Segacic wasn't called up so quickly. And then all of a sudden we are seeing lots of people brought in to these camps when they haven't earned it, and I think people have issue with those two ideas colliding. But I think where the line has to be drawn, and Matt, you touched on it there, a lot of these guys aren't getting match minutes. Bringing them into training and seeing how they are in a high performance environment with the eyes of putting down the yardstick to know in 4 months' time, have they gone up, have they gone down, can I select them for the World Cup? That's where it is. But Jacob, that step from making a good impression to training to then actually going and playing for the national team, earning your first cap, getting another Socceroos shirt and appearance, that still feels like the marker that he's holding firm to, which is, I think, how you can kind of mesh those two ideas together.
Yeah, and that's kind of been consistent, I suppose, throughout his tenure. So it's not massively surprising, and like Matt kind of said, it's kind of worth testing out these players. He's got he's got this move for a reason, and he's still there for a reason. If he was completely rubbish, they'd have dropped him by now at Manchester United.
The first team at 18.
Exactly.
Well, 17 was the last time.
So, there's definitely a player in there. So it's, it's worth testing the waters out. And, the likelihood of him seeing the pitch, I'd be doubtful in this upcoming window. But like you said, it's giving him that opportunity to impress directly in front of Popovic. And to Matt's point of he's kind of an invisible player because of the league he's playing in. Well, he won't be invisible now because he's got that opportunity to actually show what he can do in front of the people who are going to be making those decisions moving forward. So I think that kind of, makes sense. But it's just, you can see why people are kind of screaming hypocrisy a little bit though, right? Because it does feel like, hang on, there are players perhaps who maybe have done more that, aren't getting this kind of a look in and things like that. But I mean, when has there ever been a single Socceroos squad announcement where people haven't been upset that X, Y, or Z hasn't been included in the team, and it's absolutely rubbish. They should sack the coach. He doesn't know what he's doing. Blah, blah, blah. Every single window we hear that. So at this point, you just kind of get used to it, right?
You do a little bit, Matt. I want to talk as well about the rankings. Now, I can't get through a week of the RBA podcast without mentioning some kind of coefficient. But obviously, Australia are sitting 26th in the world rankings at the moment, would likely need to win both of these games and have some results from other nations go their way to jump up into 24th. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be a pot B team, because there have been some rumors about FIFA changing the regulations in terms of how they seed teams coming through the playoffs and how that might look.
First thing, I really want to voice my disgust with FIFA on this, right? Because I think the last few World Cup cycles, since there's been a clear change of direction in terms of expansion and things like that, with FIFA as a company, there's been some really, really bizarre decisions around the qualification process, doing the draws, the fundamentals of how the draws work, but especially for those playoff spots, because ever since the Qatar cycle, for whatever reason, they've made the decision that the playoffs will happen after the draw, which has completely diluted the ability of being able to seed teams correctly, but also the ability to seed teams geographically as well. Because obviously we know there's typically been the ruling around UEFA is the only confederation that's allowed the two teams in one spot. But we know that with the Women's World Cup that was here in Australia, we had Jamaica versus Panama in Perth. That was because that seeding was for the AFC or OFC, with Chinese Taipei and Papua New Guinea being in that bracket. But of course, they were both bested by Paraguay and Panama, so it set up a really awkward dynamic where two CONCACAF teams split it into a group, right? And that's just one example of you've literally just gone against the mold of your own rules. How is this happening? And now there's this idea of all of a sudden the World Cup draws coming up, the playoffs are coming up. We've got really beloved football nations like Nigeria and Italy on the cusp of having to go through a playoff route, and it's on a whim to please those countries, let's just automatically seed them without the knowledge that they're actually going to qualify for the. Are you kidding? North Macedonia could end up a pot one team. Bosnia and Herzegovina could end up a pot one team because they best Italy. That is just a joke.
So just for context for people listening, so this rumor is that, say, if Italy are going through the playoffs and they have their 4 teams and they have semifinals and a final, and Italy would be the highest ranked team in that little bracket to qualify for the World Cup. No matter who wins that playoff spot, they would be seeded as if they were Italy. So number 9 or 10 in the world.
And you can excuse me, thank you for butting in so I didn't get overly heated. That would have been a bit awkward, but it just, for me, it's a mockery, because even with the way Italy have obviously been playing, in the way that a side like Norway has beaten 3-0, you'd argue that that alone is enough for them to be punished further down the draw. And yes, it's uncomfortable for the pot 2 or pot 3 team. Imagine in our shoes, first ever time in pot 2, first ever time being in that serious bracket where we could be end up getting a favourable draw for around a 16 game, around a 32 game, whatever it is. And that's where, again, I look at that and I think, well, if we're drawn with Italy, we have the issue all again. I mean, we know very, very infamously now what happened with the U20s getting the most stacked group going around. So we wouldn't want to be in that situation again. But at the same time, that is literally the point of the draw. And that's the way FIFA have designed the system, by having playoffs after the draw. It's your own fault.
Yeah.
I really, yeah.
So there are Yeah, there are a lot of variables, right? So we still have to try and win and get as many points as possible under the current slash, old system. Because Canada are ranked below us, they obviously jump up into a pot one team by virtue of being the host. So we'd actually need to be top 23 to get that pool two status. So there's a lot of variables. We'll tell you where we sit when we actually know. But that is another kind of other element to this window, is that winning matches is important in that regard, although I'm sure that's not really what the team are thinking. In terms of, Jacob, just trying to get yourselves ready, trying to learn as much as you can. Obviously, there's been the whole logistics argument. We're going to be only a handful of nations in the world that will have played as much in the US and Mexico and Canada as anyone else. I understand a lot of these venues aren't actually World Cup venues, but dealing with the logistics, the travel, and Popovich talked about this in his press conference as well. There's all that kind of stuff to deal with, and they're learning so they know what their options are. And then it's obviously the squad factor in and narrowing down where you're at. And then playing South American opposition. We're trying to tick off all these different confederations as we go through these windows and play against different styles and different versions of different teams.
Yeah, that's spot on. It's it's a results-based business, but now that the team's qualified, it's less of a results-based business. Obviously, want to still get the wins and want to still play good football and all of that, but there is that opportunity, I suppose, to kind of just test things out a little bit. I'd be surprised to see anything too experimental. I think we kind of know how the Socceroos are going to line up, the way they're going to look to play, the kind of players they're going to want to try and pick and who fits the system best and things like that. That's what we're going to see, right, is potentially Popovich testing out some players in different roles to try and see who works where and what his options are. But I think in terms of what the actual system is, that's pretty well down pat now. It's, they're going to be playing with those wing backs and those kind of inverted wingers, and that's just going to be the way that it is moving forwards. But everything else, like you said, it is kind of just almost like the last two windows, I suppose, have been a mini World Cup in a way, right? Where it is just, like you said, that logistics stuff. And another one as well, which you might think is a bit silly, but food. And this is actually a big one for, teams of any sport going overseas, is that, if you get, a dodgy meal, it's and it just goes through the squad. Your squad's wiped out, sort of thing. So it's it sounds ridiculous, right? Why do they care about the food? But it gives them the knowledge of, right, what are the good spots, right? Who can we trust? Who can we not trust? Kind of stuff. And organize the catering and stuff in advance so that they get there, it's sorted. They know they're not going to get sick. They're not going to have food poisoning. There's no risks or any problems with it and things like that. So no, it's it's going to be just basically almost them having a little bit of a boot camp in advance. We saw, was it Qatar, in the lead up to them hosting the World Cup, tried their own boot camp, right, where they just stuck it out for, was it like 5 months, where they were playing friendly fixtures, and look, it didn't pan out too great for them. But I like this idea of you're kind of getting accustomed to having to overcome jet lag in a relatively short kind of time span, playing games very, very close together, almost back to back in the US, in that environment, against good opposition, World Cup opposition. So it's basically a little mini boot camp, a little World Cup, just looking ahead to making sure that everything's sorted. They don't have to worry about any of that stuff heading into it. It's all about, who are we going to pick, right? That's their big worry.
Yep. Well, the first team that the Socceroos are playing in this November international window is Venezuela, a team that's gone through the ringer, really, in the last couple of months. Plenty of turmoil, plenty of changes. They are the only CONMEBOL nation to have never qualified for the finals of a men's World Cup. They looked like they were going to be setting that record straight when they got to the final match day of the CONMEBOL qualifying, or at least have an opportunity to go through the playoffs, which is where they were sitting in 7th. If not for Bolivia getting a 1-0 victory over Brazil, of all nations, on the final day to kick Venezuela out. So they have not and will not qualify for this World Cup. They have sacked their coach. They have named a very big squad with a lot of fresh names, 35 of them is my understanding. Matt, it feels somewhat superfluous to even try and predict what we're going to get from this Venezuela team on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, it's one that really, you go in, I think, from our part of the world, and we have a certain stereotype of the Americas and what to expect, right? It is really, honestly, quite a shame that Venezuela are really by the book, exactly what we'd expect for a pretty out of sorts, pretty arrogant South American team. I mean, they've had like a coach turnover within the calendar year of 2025. Both the previous manager and the guy that's just come in are both Venezuelan, so there's just not much of a background there. And do you remember when I made the comment about Cuba? It's like, you know, these kids might as well play football on the moon. It's a bit of that feeling about Venezuela going in, because where you know, we can look at a Venezuelan team and at least acknowledge, you know, they've had some really good results within CONMEBOL qualifying, and you know, we know that Solomon Rondon is a legendary player, done amazing things at continental level, you know, both with Pachuca at club level, getting them you know, controversially sort of led through the Intercontinental Cup and being kicked out of the Club World Cup. That was a whole thing. And, you know, his time at the Premier League. We know what someone like that can offer, but we're in the situation where someone like that is not even here. So there is just no read we can get on a very inexperienced team. And yes, Venezuelan youth teams have done well internationally as well. But the other thing I'd say on this, and it even applies to Colombia more than Venezuela, these teams barely leave their bubble in the Americas. Not only do they exclusively play CONMEBOL qualifying, and then every other random game will be played in like South Carolina or something like that, but they are not exposed, and quite frankly, and we know it from when Peru faced us and they were so arrogant in 2022, these teams don't care. They don't care about the international world around them. And you can tell this because Colombia's other team that they've booked in this window is New Zealand, which, like, the whole point of pre-World Cup friendlies is you try and match up with teams that you think you'll face at the World Cup. You know, to prepare for Denmark in the Russia World Cup, we famously went to Oslo and played Norway. That's the kind of thing you've got to do. Why have they decided to play Australia and New Zealand in one window? It's bizarre. And you can tell that, by the way, this is the approach that Nigeria were taking, because it was Nigeria that booked these friendlies, and we took over for Nigeria when they shockingly made the playoffs. So, yeah, I don't know. It really reeks of disrespect and of arrogance. And I can't help but think that if there is the ability to go out there and teach them a bit of a lesson in Houston, I'd love the ability to do that, because nothing riles me up more than South American arrogance.
Jacob, what did you dig up?
Interestingly, a little bit. Obviously, most of it under the previous regime, which, as we've touched on, is now no longer in charge there. But this is, like Matt said, your quintessential South American team. They are going to be, just in defense, they are going to be the most annoying team that you will ever come up against. I think they were in the 90th percentile in terms of fouls committed per game in the lead up to the 2024 Copa America. Like, you know, they're just one of those teams that are just going to get under your skin all game long, do really annoying stuff.
Even more so than the Thuggeroos.
Thuggeroos, yeah, that's right. Well, because and this is the thing, right? Is they're not going to be like these huge incidents, right, where they're going to go in and get themselves sent off. It's just going to be really annoying stuff that's going to just break up the flow of the game. So it's going to be really, I think, a test of the Socceroos' patience, their ability from set pieces as well to create chances, not necessarily from open play. And that themselves is something that Venezuela also have struggled with, though, is creating chances. They've got a very good conversion rate for the most part. I think, again, kind of somewhere in the 80th, 90th percentile in terms of expected goals on target, but it's actually creating those chances that they kind of struggle with. They don't get many opportunities to do that per game. One of the fewest shots per 90 of any South American team. So it's kind of like they can finish the ball, but they just don't get to put themselves in that kind of a position all that often. And I think that's kind of going to be the running kind of story for them, especially with such a young team. It just, I mean, like, you're looking at through the squad list, like 2/3 of these guys have played less than 10 games for Venezuela. Like, it's just a team of basically, Matt was saying before we hit record, it's just, they've just called up their under 20s, like, and they're just like, here you go, lads, it's time to make your senior appearances. It's a really, really inexperienced squad, so it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do, how they set up. Previously, they've liked to play with a back three and wing backs, but in more recent games, there was a recent loss to Argentina, they played with a back four all game, so even their defensive structure, nobody actually quite knows what it's going to look like. So there's a lot of question marks over it, and I think that in and of itself presents an interesting challenge for the Socceroos of, we can't necessarily go in with we know how to counter them, and what they're going to do and how they're going to look to play. You've got to be flexible and adjustable during the game, during that 90 minutes, and you've got to make those adjustments correctly, and you've got to identify them. So it's going to be a really good test, I think, of Popovic and his skills to manage during the game, make substitutions at the right time, make changes to the way that they're trying to play to counter what they might be seeing for the first time when they actually go out there on the pitch.
I really like that point, actually, because you remember lots of interviews after the last World Cup about Argentina, and the quote that obviously made its way to Australia was that Australia was the most difficult team to prepare for. I think that gets lost a little bit, not necessarily the most difficult to play, but to prepare for, because they didn't quite know what they were getting. So that, as it say, in itself is its own challenge, and having the ability to deal with that is very crucial. And you talk about, Matt, you brought up the typical kind of South American idea of how we think they play football. And Jacob, you do go on to say they're a team that is going to be just annoying and pick at you. And this is something over the longer term that the Australian men's national team has definitely struggled with, playing other teams in Asia with a very similar mindset of we're just going to annoy you with the time wasting, with the niggling fouls, just get under your skin. And traditionally, Australia has not handled it very well. I do think there has been a mentality shift under Tony Popovic. And I think, Matt, we've also seen Australia employ some of those tactics. And in a similar way, I almost compare it back to our conversations that we've had about the Brisbane Roar this season. It's not that doing those things and, being physical in quotation marks, or, breaking the game down, time wasting is your tactic to win, but it is part of everything that is available to you to win a game of football. So not doing that, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's good or bad, if you're not doing that stuff, you're probably less likely to win. And I think that's where the mentality lies. But I think that's an interesting clash. Are Australia more prepared for that kind of style of football, or that kind of 90 minutes that potentially awaits them with Venezuela?
To be honest, I think there have been signs that Popovic has installed a mentality that's really actually evolved from what Graham Arnold was doing, right? And I know that this is something that's going in the right direction. To call it a winning mentality is stupid, because there's no guarantees that we can go to a World Cup and win games, right? That's the beauty and the respect of a FIFA World Cup. But stuff like the bickering and the fighting that kind of went on in the Canada game, I've just not seen an Australian side care that much to be able to actually stand up and show some fight. But more telling within that was that shot of literally Irankunda walking over to the technical area, and Popovic and some of the boys actually just physically like hugging him and just being like, it's fine. For me, it's the ability to both show the fight, but then that ability to actually stand up and be so mentally fit that you're even able to see that within the situation there's more that's kind of going on here. There's more to control. It's so nuanced. You've got 22 men out there that all have their own emotions, that all have their different responses, all have their different roles, and it just feels that there's a balance there that Australia just inherently has right. Whatever happened over the course of losing that Japan game in Sydney in the lead up to Qatar, to just the extreme run and rise that the Socceroos have been on ever since, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's just very clear to me that Graham Arnold has installed some kind of superhuman ability in the Socceroos, and Tony Popovic has taken that and said, how can I evolve this? How can I make it better? How can I make Australian football the best that it can possibly be? And it's the small things like that that are a real winner, and a real sign of, I think, where we can go to face these foreign teams and simply just be better than them. I think the mental side of the game is something that we've just got in an abundance right now. Talking to guys like a lot of the international football channels and people that I view, I hear that term of Australian grit. Like, it is a bit of a stereotype, but from a North American's perspective, from like I know these guys who are, one's based in Texas, one's based in California. They're kind of Mesoamericans that watch a lot of soccer, right? And every time they do their reviews on the AFC, it's just Australia don't have the star power, or at least they didn't, but there's the grit. And the grit is enough to go to the round of 16 and give Argentina trouble. Yep.
Built in their DNA.
Aussie DNA. Go on and say it.
Very good. Oh, look, it's going to be a fascinating match. Anything could happen. Of course, for some reason, I don't know if you guys noticed as well, the kickoff for this game was just continually delayed. I remember when we were talking about it earlier in the week, I'd looked at it earlier in the day and it said 12 p.m. And then I just happened to see on a Socceroos tweet later in the day that 1 p.m. So I think live I said 12 or 1, not because I wasn't sure, but because I saw two different posts. And then a couple of days later, it's gone to 1:30. So at the moment, it's scheduled for a 1:30 kickoff. Who knows when we'll actually see it? But as we say, not a bad time on Saturday afternoon to be watching football.